All right, let's take a journey inside our own bodies. We're going to explore this masterfully engineered suit of armor, a flexible, living cage that protects our most vital organs. We're talking about the thoracic cage.
And here it is, in all its glory. I mean, look at it. This elegant, dome-shaped framework is basically your body's personal armor. Its most critical job? Well, it's shielding your heart, lungs, and liver from, every bump and impact. But here's the cool part. It's not just some rigid shield. It's actually surprisingly dynamic.
So, the big question is, how is this incredible structure actually built? How does it all fit together? We're going to figure that out. Think of it like a puzzle we're about to solve, piece by piece, starting with the main anchor and then seeing how everything else connects. Okay, before we dive into the nitty-gritty anatomy, let's just take a second to appreciate its impressive resume. Seriously, this thing isn't just a passive shield. Nope, it actively expands and contracts to help you breathe. It gives muscles all over your upper body a place to attach, and it even helps support your arms. It's a real multitasker, for sure. All right, let's start right at the front. The cornerstone, the absolute foundation of the thoracic cage, is the sternum. You probably know it as the breastbone. Just think of it like the central anchor, kind of like a breastplate, that holds the whole front of the cage together.
Now, what's fascinating here is that the sternum isn't just one solid bone from birth. Not at all. It's actually made of 3 distinct parts that fuse together as we get older. You've got the manubrium up top, the central body, and then this little thing called the xiphoid process at the very bottom.
Okay, let's zoom in on that top section, the manubrium. This is the widest and strongest part of the sternum, and it's shaped almost like the handle of a shield. Super important spot, because this is where your collarbones, your clavicles, and that first pair of ribs lock in.
Right below the manubrium, you've got the body. This is the long, central part of the sternum. You can think of it as the main docking station for the cartilage from ribs 2 all the way through 7. This really forms the bulk of that frontal shield we've been talking about.
And then at the very, very bottom, we find the smallest part, the xiphoid process. This little tip can actually vary a lot in shape from person to person. It starts out as soft cartilage and, believe it or not, often doesn't completely turn to bone until you're around 40 years old. And hey, it's also a super critical landmark in CPR. It's the one spot you need to avoid pressing on because you could cause some serious internal injury.
So the main takeaway here is that the sternum is anything but a simple flat bone. Its surface is covered with all these specific little notches and angles, and they're absolutely essential for connecting the whole cage together perfectly.
And check this out. Here's a feature you can find on yourself right now. Go ahead. Feel for that little dip at the base of your neck, right between your collarbones. Feel that? That's it. That's the jugular notch, and it's right at the very top of the manubrium.
Okay, now if you trace your finger down from that notch just a little bit, you should feel a slight ridge or a bump. That's not a mistake. That's actually a really critical landmark in medicine. It's called the sternal angle, and it marks the exact spot where the manubrium joins the body.
So why is this tiny little bump so important? Well, it's like an anatomical signpost. Doctors use it all the time to reliably find the second rib. And once they find that, they can count down to locate specific spots for listening to your heart and lung sounds. But that's not all. It also marks the level deep inside your chest where your windpipe, your trachea, splits on its way to the lungs. Super useful landmark.
All right, we've got our anchor. Let's move on to the ribs and see how this cage really starts to take shape. Now, we've all got 12 pairs of them, but here's the thing. Not all ribs are created equal. We actually classify them into 3 distinct groups, and it all depends on how or even if they connect to the sternum up front. This table breaks it all down nice and clearly. First up, you've got ribs 1 through 7. We call these the true ribs because each one gets its own personal strip of cartilage that connects it directly to the sternum. Simple enough, right? Then you have ribs 8, 9, and 10, the false ribs. Their cartilage kind of merges together before it connects up to the cartilage of rib number 7. And finally, you've got ribs 11 and 12, the floating ribs. And yep, you guessed it, they don't connect to the sternum at all.
And this diagram really helps you see those differences. You can clearly see the direct one-to-one connections of the true ribs. Then, look how the false ribs sort of piggyback on each other with that shared cartilage. And way down at the bottom, you can see the floating ribs. They're back there protecting your kidneys, but they just stop. No connection at the front.
Okay, so we've sorted the ribs into their groups. Now let's zoom in, way in. What does a single, typical rib actually look like up close? What are its key parts?
Well, most of your ribs, We're talking pairs 3 through 9. They all follow a pretty standard blueprint. It's why anatomists call them typical ribs. They all share a set of common features, so they make a perfect model for us to study.
So here's that blueprint. Every typical rib has a head at the back, which actually connects to the spine in 2 places. Then there's a neck, and right after that, a little bump called a tubercle that acts as a 3rd connection point to the vertebrae. And from there, you get the long, curved body or shaft that sweeps around to form the cage.
Now get this. Here is a fantastic example of just brilliant, elegant design. If you look on the inner lower edge of a rib, there's this shallow little channel. It's called the costal groove. And it's not just some random dent. It's a perfectly designed protected highway for all the delicate nerves and blood vessels that have to run between the ribs. It just tucks them away, shielding them from damage. So smart.
But of course, in anatomy, there are always exceptions to the rule, right? The first 2 ribs and the last 3, they don't follow the blueprint. They have unique shapes and features all their own, because they have very specialized jobs to do. These are what we call the atypical ribs.
And when you see them side by side, the difference is just immediately obvious. On the left, you've got that gentle curve of a typical rib. But then look at the first rib on the right. Whoa, it's short, it's wide, it has a really sharp curve. So why the weird shape? It's all about creating a safe passage for the major blood vessels and nerves that are heading out to your arm. Their unique shapes are a direct result of their unique jobs. Simple as that.
You know, all of this really brings us back to a core theme. One of the biggest rules in all of anatomy: structure dictates function. It's as simple as that. Every single curve, every little notch, every connection point we've looked at is there for a reason. It's all perfectly designed for its purpose.
So let's put all the pieces together. You've got the sternum acting as the super solid front anchor, then the true ribs form a really rigid upper cage, giving maximum protection to your heart and lungs, and then the false and floating ribs at the bottom, they provide that crucial flexibility, allowing your diaphragm to move up and down so you can breathe. It's this beautiful system of stability and mobility, all working together in perfect harmony.
And all of this brings us to one last, really fascinating question. We've seen how this cage is an incredible shield, right? But it's not a static suit of armor. It has to lift and expand with every single breath you take. And we're talking about 20,000 times a day. So how on earth does this bony fortress manage to be so incredibly dynamic? Well, that's a story for another time.